a lot of different diets to follow. And I think that can be overwhelming because you're like, well, what do I do? Oh, I need to be on this diet, but now I'm being told I have to be on another one. They are all the same diet. And I want everyone to feel self-assured that whatever you're doing to stay healthy, cancer free or keeping the cancer away, it is all supported within a heart healthy diet. So I'm not going to tell you one thing in this meeting and completely change it for a different one. We're looking at good plant-based foods. We want to make sure that we're choosing foods that aren't too high in saturated fat and trans fats. We want those good, heart healthy, unsaturated fats, the olive oil, canola oil, nuts. These are the things that we're going to maintain through this cooking in any class that I do with you. I'm not going to try to switch things around and make it confusing. So one of you had, written in and said that there's a family member is having some heart issues and just felt overwhelmed. Like, what do we do? Like, what am I supposed to make? So that's the tenets of what we're talking about tonight. So all of you should have gotten the recipes. We're doing a healthy eggplant parmesan because, believe it or not, there is an unhealthy way to do eggplant parmesan. We're also going to be doing a raspberry mousse to have a nice light dessert. And alongside of it, a beet salad with walnuts and goat cheese. So the theme here, sticking with heart healthy, sticking with Valentine's, it's lots of reds and pinks and purples. That's kind of the picture I had. If I'm going to make something to eat, I want it to look good and I want it to taste good. So let's get started with the main dish. That's going to be the heart healthy foods. So Sam, if you want, you can switch over and spotlight the food now rather than spotlighting me, because now I'll be talking, but you don't really need to see me directly as we're going through this. The great thing when it comes to our heart healthy eating and our heart healthy eggplant is that this is not complicated. It just takes a little bit more time. Anytime I make something here, I do a dry run at home. Sometimes I do several, depending on how things turned out, because I want to make sure that it tastes good. If we have to make any adjustments, that I'm helping you do that. Let me put my gloves on. So with your recipe, it says, you're supposed to get about 3 medium eggplants. You want to play with it and figure out what to get. This would be about a medium to large eggplant. They all kind of vary in size. What I like with this recipe, you'll find some eggplant parmesan, you're going to be slicing it lengthwise and laying it out that way. That works. I'm going to be slicing along in circles. So it almost makes a perfect little portion because you're just going to stack 2 slices in the recipe and then it's ready to be used, and it kind of already has the little portion pieces in there. You can do whatever direction you like, but when you're starting it, you're just cutting off your ends and you're trying to do about 1/2 inch rounds. Now, because eggplant obviously comes from nature, you're not going to find completely uniform eggplants that are all going to be perfect. And I'm just thinking about this now. Because we are cooking in a room that is not actually a kitchen, I'm going through the phases with this so you can see what it looks like. And then I have the finished product at the end. So I'm heating up a finished product in a little toaster in here so you can see what it's going to look like. But just recognize it's not going to be the full casserole like you're going to be making at home, because we do not have a giant stove here. So we're going to cut about our 1/2 inch rounds. You will look through, there's lots of different recipes, different approaches with eggplant parmesan. Some of you, if you've made this before, you might have seen that they'll recommend that you salt the eggplant and dry it out to try to pull the moisture and the bitterness out. That probably came up as I like to look at several different versions to figure out what I like, things that I might adjust before I settle on a final recipe. What the predominant feel was when it comes to taking your eggplant, because it's soft, it's moist. If I was going to pan fry this, that's often when you would want to salt both sides generously and then set it on top of paper towels. And in some recipes, they'll even have you like stack another tray with heavy pots on it to really push the moisture out. That way, because it won't be too wet, you know, the seasonings between putting your wash on there and then your breading and cheese, it's going to stay on a little bit better when I fry it. So really, you know, doing the pan frying is only time that you need to salt it. Since we're doing heart healthy cooking, I know one concern, and it depends on the individuals, that sometimes you can be a little bit more salt sensitive. You might be limiting that because maybe it brings up your blood pressure, it causes you to retain too much fluid. There also might be people with kidney issues so that they don't want to overly salt their food. So we are not going to do that. So if you've done that in the past, you've heard about it, I did want to touch on it. Since this is going to be baked, all that great moisture is going to stay in here. It's not going to make it too watery. It's actually going to be the perfect texture once you bake it. And when you look at a few different recipes and different commentaries of chefs, they said there was really no need to try to dry this out because it's going to taste about the same once you finish baking. Most conventional eggplants that we use do not have a lot of bitterness to them, so you don't need to worry about washing them out. So to make sure that your mixture is going to stick, you're going to use an egg wash. Now, fun little treat, since we are working in our Cancer Survivorship Center and we're not actually at my house, all my eggs are in my own kitchen. I forgot them. So it was a great opportunity to talk about substituting foods when things don't turn out exactly the way you intended. So I took some Greek yogurt, plain yogurt. I watered it down to make it thinner, so it's that consistency of an egg wash. You could also just use plain milk or cream. You can use olive oil or canola oil, any sort of liquid. If I was doing something sweet, I could use honey, syrup, but since I'm staying in the savory realm, I decided to go with what I have, which was yogurt, and thin it out. The main goal of this is to make our breading stick. In our breading, we're going with something. Now, this will be great for any of you trying to either be careful about eating too many carbs, or if anyone has like gluten allergy or gluten sensitivity, there's actually no bread in this recipe. What we used some almond flour. Now, almond flour, for all of you who've used this, is not actually flour. All it is blanched almonds that have been ground up. That's it. It's they might also call it almond meal. So it's cut up almonds. It's a great way of getting some healthy protein. It's got those good omega-3s that are heart healthy that we want. And it gives you a nice crispy texture when we're baking them, which is really the point of doing flour. You also want to make sure that you're using a nice grated Parmesan cheese so that it's going to be really fine and mix in well with our almond flour. And to finish it off, you want to get a little bit of flavor in here. So I already added in a little bit of salt, not too much. I really pushed more herbs, some pepper, and then an Italian seasoning blend. So you could go easy, have it all mixed up for you, or you can get your oregano, you should get some thyme, marjoram, whatever herbs that you want, mix them up and put them in here so that you're getting a lot more flavor out of this. Because eggplants on their own are not a super strong flavored food. So you want to make sure you're putting the flavors in with your herbs. So once you have cut up your discs, you're going to dip it into your wash. Just get a little bit wet. And a good thing to remember is when you're putting this on there, it's best just to sprinkle it over the eggplant instead of dipping it into the bowl. Because if you're dipping it in the bowl, after a while, you kind of get a clumpy mess of your leftover almond meal and your Parmesan. So it's not, it makes it a little bit hard to work with by the time you get to the end of the bowl. This does make it much easier. It keeps up the texture nicely, and you'll be able to get through and you're not wasting anything. I always hate going through and then you got to get out the bags of everything again. So you're going to go through with all of your eggplants. You're going to dip them, do a nice little wash, get a good sprinkle of the almond meal and the Parmesan cheese, and set it onto your baking sheet. Now, you have preheated your oven to 425 degrees. This is what keeps it heart healthy. You are going to make sure that you are baking it. We don't fry. We don't need to add any extra fat or oil other than, the little bit of the preparations. So this will go in the oven and it cooks for a total of 30 minutes so that you can get it nice and tender and you can get a crispy crust. When I was baking this at home originally, I found the best thing to do is if you have parchment paper. When I put the rounds on the parchment paper and a little bit of a round stuck over and hit the regular metal pan, that tended to burn a little bit more. So I recommend parchment paper. At least try some aluminum foil. And before you put it in, you want to put a little bit of an oil on top. Now, some recipes will say cooking spray. I would rather use oil. So this is just a pressurized can of olive oil. You know, you go to a Williams Sonoma, you go online, you can actually find containers that you can pour your olive oil in, and they have a pump top that helps get a little bit more of a, trying to think of it. I think it's like aerating it or atomizing it. And then you're going to take it and just spray a light spray on top with your oil. This way it's not too heavy handed if I had to actually take the container and dump it on top of it, but it's going to help get a nice flavor to it. If you are putting it directly into the pan in order to cook it, you also want to make sure that you spray the bottom. You don't really need to if you have parchment paper. A bit of a dry throat. So it's total, you're gonna put it in the oven, in the preheated oven for, you know, first you want to put a timer on for 15 minutes. 15 minutes through, you want to flip it and then finish for the last 15 minutes that both sides get crispy. Is going to look like this. You get a nice dark crispiness. You're going to have uniform on both sides. This is going to be what you're building your eggplant Parmesan up with. So simple, you know, most of the process of this is a lot of times just the waiting as things bake. There's not a lot of active work in this. And my favorite thing, let's say you're going to make this for, you know, family member, a loved one, someone you want to celebrate Valentine's with at home, give them something heart healthy. You can get this all prepped ahead of time, pull it out of the fridge, stick it in the oven, and then you can really just be part of the evening rather than having to sit and cook the entire evening. I love anything I can prep ahead and I'm not taking up my entire night being away from my guests and kind of missing out on all the action because I'm stuck in the kitchen. I'm doing all the work. So now, if you're someone who likes to make your own gravy or your own marinara sauce, more power to you. But we're also working in the realm of what's easy. Not everyone wants to do everything from scratch. So on the recipe, I'd recommended getting the Rao's. I always said Rao's, but I think it's Rao's marinara, their homemade marinara. The reason I like this brand is it is low in sugar. You know, when you flip, we're always saying, you know, dietitians were telling you to flip and check the labels. One of the important things when it comes to, especially something like, you know, marinara, it's not really going to be high in fat. They can add some oil in here. There's always going to be some olive oil. So it's going to be low in our saturated fats. This, I'll get a little bit closer. Not sure how much you can see, but you got 1 gram of saturated fat. That's the bad stuff. If you're ever looking at fat, what we want to keep low is the saturated and trans, which are always directly below the fat area. If you keep that at 16 grams or less per day, that is what we would call a heart healthy plan. But the other thing I like about the Rao's is it does not add any extra sugar. You'll see everything that's in here is 0 added or included sugar, and everything is just coming from the tomatoes that are in here. So it makes it a nice, really good, fresh tasting sauce that's not going to be packing on all the stuff that I don't need. Who needs extra sugar when it comes to, you know, marinara sauce? So you start with doing about a cup of the sauce in the bottom of the pan. You're going to spread it out. So what do we like about tomatoes? They're high in lycopene. It's a good antioxidant. They're full of great flavor. You're going to get, with this sauce, you're also going to get a little bit of fiber, which is what makes this such a great meal, is that not only do I get something that's savory and tastes good, but it's going to fill me up. I'm eating healthy and I'm not going to feel like I'm starving at the end. So you want to spread it out. Then you're going to start setting your rounds into the sauce. The only frustrating, I'm a little bit of a perfectionist with some of these, is that it's going to be hard to find all uniform, rounds, because it is our eggplant that came from nature. So it's not going to be exactly the same size as we stack up, but that's okay. I think it's kind of nice to use up space. So I'm going to stick one of my little top pieces in the middle, so I'm not sacrificing any yummy. You'll want to put a little bit more of your sauce on top. So you have the sauce on the bottom so it doesn't stick. You're going to put about another cup on top, spread it out. And then comes the cheese. So that's when I deal with it. People get worried. What about cheese? I know it's bad for me. I shouldn't eat it. I was told, by my doctor, I need to follow a heart-healthy diet. We have to always weigh that with what exactly you're using. One of the lowest fat cheeses that they have is mozzarella. You can always find part skim mozzarella. The fat is about 6 grams. The saturated fat is even lower. So looking at my little container here, if I'm doing, a portion of this, I get about 3.5 grams of saturated fat. That's for a quarter of a cup. That's going to be about the total you will eat in one portion for you. You're not eating 2-3 cups of the mozzarella. You're just eating your portion. So don't worry. This is also a great way, because we're using eggplants. We're not using any meat. This is offering our protein. It gives us calcium, which for most of us here today, being women, and we're getting above our 30s, 40s, 50s, we want to make sure we're getting plenty of calcium. We're also going to do our Parmesan. It's going to give a nice flavor. Parmesan's a little bit higher in our fats, in our saturated fats, than mozzarella, but we're not using nearly as much. You can see you're just kind of using enough to get a little sprinkle of flavor. And then on top of that, fresh herbs. This is some basil, chopped it up. You can add some nice color. If you wanted to, you could also add in, some spinach leaves. You could do a little arugula. You could add a lot of nice bright color without having to add sort of meat. So we're still going in the realm of our plant-based foods. So once that's on, we're going to do another layer here. Cover everything. So this is just a 2-layer dish. So you can see that each of these rounds is going to end up being one portion, depending on how hungry you are, but it should be enough to satisfy you. And fun fact, my 11-year-old son, who can be a little pick, never had eggplant before, hadn't really wanted to try it, decided to try it yesterday because I was making it, doing a test batch, loved it. He was just like, this is so good. So it's not only dietitian endorsed, it is endorsed by your typical 11-year-old boy who can be a little bit resistant with new foods and new flavors. That kind of made it, I always like that. It makes it exciting to me when not only do I spend the time on it, but it's really just kind of appreciated and tastes delicious. So it gives us another option of something to try in our house. And as you can see, I can prep it ahead of time. I can keep it in the fridge and I can throw it in for dinner without having to take a ton of time at the end of the night. Now, one thing with eggplant, because it has a little bit of a spongier texture to it, it generally does not freeze very well. So this is not one of those things that you're going to want to prep like lasagnas and stick in the freezer and pull out. So you kind of have to play with it. Sometimes if you're doing thinner strips, I have done really thin strips. And in that case, I did like pan saute them a little bit and try to dry them out. That does work a little bit better with keeping that texture to where you want it. And give me just one quick moment. Well, we'll keep this cooking. So we're going to set this aside. In TV land, we're going to imagine that I'm now sticking this in the oven and allowing it to cook. When you're using fresh ingredients, it's only because the eggplant's already going to be warm. I don't need to start from scratch and cook it for 40 minutes. At this point, when I put it in the oven or when you put it in the oven, you only need to cook it for about 15 minutes. You really just want to check for when it looks bubbly and delicious and looks like kind of that texture that you want to eat. So we're going to move all this out of the way. And moving on to our beet salad with goat cheese dressing. So beets, here at last month's meeting, I clearly have a love affair with beets. I think they're delicious. They have this great color. They're high in fiber. They also have a lot of iron in them. So it is an excellent thing to be added into your meal plans. But, you know, make sure that you have a little time and a good sharp knife because they are stiff. Beets cannot really be consumed very easily raw unless you're doing very, very fine shaves of beets. You're going to want to make sure that you roast it. So I went ahead, cut my beet into like little cubes, and I really just want to keep it pretty much bite-sized, something that I could put on a fork and not be having to cut it up on my salad plate. I want to make it as easy as possible. So you take the beets and you're going to put them in your preheat oven. Spread it out on the tray.
Becky, can you repeat that again? We couldn't hear you.
Oh, I apologize. You're going to put it on a baking sheet. So take your cut up beets. Before you lay it down, put a little olive oil on the baking sheet. You don't need the parchment paper for this. I recommend you just put it on the straight baking sheet. You're going to add your olive oil, salt, and pepper. Or if you just want to add like a little bit of, you'd rather stick with pepper. If you want to keep the salt really light, this is where it's up to you to keep it to the taste that you enjoy. That is going to roast in the oven. Let me just. So you're going to roast it in the oven at 425 for about 15 to 20 minutes. So same thing. It's like doing, working with your eggplant. It's a lot of downtime in between. So it gives you time, let it roast 15, 20 minutes. At 15, 20 minutes, I'm going to pull it out, stir it up, stick it back in for another 10 minutes. Once that is done, that's where we're going to use some great flavor. We're going to use some honey, a tablespoon of honey and a tablespoon of balsamic vinegar. This is going to get a nice sweet savoriness to the eggplant or to the beet. And you're going to mix it up and cook it for another 10 minutes. So you realize we have like 15, 20 minutes, we have 10 minutes, and now we're close to 30 minutes. We're going to do another 10 minutes, sometimes longer if it's still looking sticky. And what it looks like is this. I have my roasted beets. They have a nice soft texture. You could add a little bit more salt. I kind of like the sweetness that you get from the balsamic vinegar. And this makes an easy meal because with just a little oil, vinegar, honey, and balsamic, or oil, vinegar, honey, and then some salt and pepper, I have some pickled beets that I could use anytime. If you would like, you can warm these up in a pan so that they're nice and warm. You kind of have a nice warm winter salad, because a lot of times having those cold salads sounds great in July. But when I have about, what is it, 3 degrees outside right now, it may not be as appealing. So you can always throw a few in the pan, move them around just so you get a little bit of crispness to it, and you can add that in. And on your recipe, I'd recommended using spring greens or spring mix. What I like about spring mix is you get a lot of different, types of leaves in here. You have some pops of purple. Arugula is another great thing to use, but sometimes arugula just by itself can be a little bit woody and chewy. So having, pick the types of lettuces that you like. I go on color and texture. If you prefer just having more of a romaine for Christmas, that's fine too. But the more variety you get, the more likely you are to cover all your bases and sort of get all the nutrients that you need. Once that is done, you're going to take your nice warm beets, grab this. I'm going to sprinkle some on my salad here. Get this great color. And then I'm going to now toast some walnuts, because what tastes better than having some nuts that have been heated? In our winter class, we did some seasoned nuts that had been, just baked in the oven. This one's really quick. If you want, you can always use the oven. You can preheat it to like 350, toss your walnuts with some olive oil or canola oil, and then put it in the oven and allow it just to cook for maybe 5-10 minutes. Just keep an eye on it. You're just throwing enough oil on it to cover it and make sure that it doesn't burn. And quick spatula here. You're gonna move it around in your pan. And really the nuts, they take maybe like 3-4 minutes. You can kind of look for the color that you like. With them, you want it to go to a slightly darker color, maybe like 1 shade darker brown than it was when it came out of the box. You know, you can use whole pieces, cut it up a little, but always try to think of whoever you're, giving the food to. It's salad. You don't want to have to pull out a fork or a knife. Having big halves of walnuts can be a little overwhelming on the plate and not be something that's quite as delicious. Good. Hey, Sam, if you could do me a quick favor and get the oven mitts out of the drawer that are in our cooking area behind me, that would be super helpful.
Sure, you're right there.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
I wouldn't be able to do this without Sam today because there's so many moving parts. It's unbelievable. There's stuff in every single direction. So once you've toasted your walnuts, you kind of have this nice flavor. And with toasting any sort of nut, it does pull out more flavor. It just makes it a little bit more interesting. It's not like grabbing that bag of stale nuts that have been in the cabinet for several months. This is actually turning it into something you want to eat and that you're going to enjoy. So a few of our nuts, you're going to sprinkle them onto your salad. So yes, nuts are higher in fat. They do have all the good fats. They're not the fats that we're worried about. We're always looking for those unsaturated fats. And when they use, when people are using the omega-3 oils and fish oils, that is the type of fat that you find in nuts. That is what makes it heart healthy because it's a good antioxidant. And then the last topping for this, a little bit of goat cheese. Now, if you're not a goat cheese fan, you could use a little feta. You could just use a little bit of Parmesan. You're really just trying to bring in something that adds another flavor, a little bit of saltiness without being overwhelming. And it has something that looks like, you actually want to order at a restaurant and make kind of a nice, easy start to your dinner before you move into the eggplant Parmesan. I'm going to show you the finished product that just with our eggplant Parmesan. Now I cooked a smaller ramekin so that you guys can see what it looks like. This you could do at home. See, you get like the nice bubbly crispiness. If you want at the very end, you can throw it underneath the broiler so you get some nice brown to the cheese. And this is, perfect size portion. If you like having little individual servings, this is great for your house because if you have these, I think I got these ramekins at Crate and Barrel probably about 15 years ago when I got married. But it makes it a nice, pretty presentation that you can set on the plate. So we have some little reds and oranges. We have it along with our, our roasted beets and walnut salad. And of course, you need to have dessert. So let's move on to that last piece. I know Sam's going to be excited to try the.
That looks so good.
Sam gets the benefit from being live in person with me today. All right. So the last piece is our raspberry mousse. So I wanted to pick again something heart healthy. There's not chocolate in this one because I want something that's pretty and pink and light. Before you guys got here, I pureed this up or use my little mini Cuisinart because I can't talk while it's on. So I decided I'm just going to puree the raspberries ahead of time. Super easy. This time of year, I found that the raspberries are slightly disappointing. We don't have any fresh product coming from the Midwest because it's winter. So get frozen. It will save you time. Everything's clean. I defrosted 3/4 cup. Put it into, you can use a big blender, an immersion blender, or a mini Cuisinart like me. Throw it in here, blend it up. If you wanted to, don't like the seeds. I'm gonna just do one thing. Oh, give me 1 second, I just have to plug one. I need hot water in order to melt our gelatin, and they do not have anything close to hot water that comes out of our faucet. So I'm just heating up some water that I have in the microwave. I use a tea kettle at home, but here, as long as you're getting it warm enough so that the powdered gelatin will dissolve. Was that hot? No way. Apologize for the dead air. So, okay, hot water. There's some hot water into a cup here. You just want to have some unflavored gelatin. So on your recipe, I said use half a packet. With the Knox, you can find it anywhere. Any grocery store is going to have it. Little pack is about, I think roughly in here, it's about a tablespoon and a half. Just, you want to use about half of it. This is not like you're making Jell-O, and if you don't get the proportion right, it's not going to set up. This is just adding a little nice texture to the raspberry mousse. So about half a pack will do it. You're going to put it in with your hot water. You know, just nice, simple, plain gelatin. If you are not someone who uses gelatin, let's say you are, vegan. If you're a vegan, you could also make this recipe switching out the Greek yogurt for tofu. Tofu has much more structure to it. And that just brings me into the discussion about soy, because I did have a question come through on email before this about choosing heart-healthy alternatives and whether soy is an option, especially for cancer or cancer survivors or cancer patients, in particular for breast cancer patients. So I wanted to make sure I gave you the best answer possible. With soy, I checked the American Heart Association, the American Cancer Society, and just want to get down to the core of what is the best thing for you guys to have. Per the American Cancer Society, there has been a lot of misinterpretation, a lot of misunderstanding about the use of soy and whether that is okay. With the original studies, a lot of rodent studies and using, high amounts of isoflavones, which is the active ingredient. Just so you know what I'm doing, I'm taking a fine mesh sieve to put the gelatin in, because that way, if you get any little clumps, because the first time I did this, I did not strain it out. You get these clumps, and then when you're eating it, get a clump in your mouth. It's not quite as pleasant as you want it to be. Make sure you strain things out so that it is going to taste better. So let's finish blending this and then we'll finish our soy talk. One thing I didn't add on there, but this is optional, because we're doing Greek yogurt, the gelatin, and also mixing in a little bit of honey for our sweetness. If you want to get a little bit more flavor, it's like 2 to 3 tablespoons of honey, which is a nice amount of sweetness. I use a touch of just vanilla extract, because it gives just a hint of sweetness without having to add sugar, but you don't have to. There is a lot of tartness when it comes to using the raspberries. So you want to make sure that you're trying to counteract that tartness and make it not overwhelming. So, that's the beauty of doing like a little trial run and seeing what appeals to you and your palate. And we found that using non-fat yogurt was not as good. You need a little bit of fat in here to help balance it out. I got the Fage, the 2%, so you don't have to have a full like 4 or 5% milk fat, but 2% was just enough to give, fat gives a nice mouthfeel, a little roundness to your palate, which is pleasing. So give me 1 second, I'm gonna puree this. So just so you know, raspberries, honey, the gelatin that's dissolved in 2 tablespoons of boiling hot water, and then 3/4 of a cup of Greek yogurt that is plain. Oh, you gotta be kidding. Blend it through, you get a nice bright pink color. It will now just set up into small little containers and put it in the fridge. I have some little containers like this. It's kind of a nice way to showcase so you can actually see the pink color. When you put it in, your final product ends up being this nice pink, sweet raspberry mousse that's also healthy for you because it has the Greek yogurt in it, gives you some protein. It's giving you a lot of antioxidants with the fruit and a little bit of natural sweetness from honey. It tastes good. You could top it with a little whipped cream if you like, or just eat it the way it is. So 2 hours is all you need, or overnight. If you wanted to bake the night ahead, that gives the gelatin enough time to set up and give a little bit more consistency to it so it's not runny. So the final thoughts with the soy. I'm not done talking about soy. So per the American Cancer Society is that because many of the studies that were done on soy with isoflavones were using rodent studies, and they metabolize the soy and isoflavones a little bit differently than humans. When they look at human studies, they've actually found that the soy can be protective and it can be good that you can add into your diet without concern that it's going to cause any further issues, especially with receptor cancers. Because the isoflavones that are naturally occurring.
Come on, Becky, repeat that one more time.
Sorry. Because of the isoflavones that naturally occur within the soy products, they tend to block some of the natural estrogens that are in our body from getting to the receptors. So it's why they will have the position statement from the American Cancer Society that soy is actually a healthy thing to incorporate in your diet, but you're always thinking of doing it within moderation. Now, just like you see in the rodent studies, if you're doing extremely high amounts of soy, you're going to see a different effect than maybe if those rodents had only had a small proportion. And that was the biggest issue when you're doing that relative to what a human would actually consume. You're also looking at the quality of soy. So if you're using traditional soy, that's going to be soy milk, tofu, teff, miso. These are all, edamame, which are the soybeans. Not as much getting into a lot of these like soy supplements, not that. You want to really stick with like traditional soy. It's often, especially giving comparison to what you find people consuming in Asia. They don't have the same issues with breast cancer that we have here and the hormone receptor cancers. And there's a significant amount of intake of some soy products, of those traditional soy products there. So it gives you another option. If you're going to use any soy foods, there are, and if you want, I will send out a recipe that I found that used soy in making a chocolate and raspberry mousse. So that's something that you could try. I will also in the future do some recipes using soy. So just so you guys can see other ways to use it, because it can be a tricky product that is different. And if you don't typically cook with soy, you might feel a little bit like, I don't know if this is what it's supposed to taste like, or, what I do to infuse flavor. So here is our nice little meal, everyone. We have our starter being our beet and walnut salad that's nice and toasted and great for winter. It could also work easily as well in the summer and spring. We have our eggplant parmesan that is not going to be tipping the scales when it comes to saturated fats because most of our fat is just coming from the cheese we're using in here. Nothing is fried. We're not using any meat. If you want to saute some peppers or spinach or add a little layer of veggies in here just to bulk it up and cut down the cheese, you could do that too. And then finishing with a sweet treat that really is mostly healthy proteins from Greek yogurt and our fresh berries and a little bit of sweetness coming from the honey. I also, if you're not crazy about honey, you could use maple syrup. I did that in one of my first trials. It's just not quite as sweet. So there's a lot more tanginess that came through in the mousse, but you would have to sort of gear it towards what you like personally with your palate. So that is our heart healthy meal. I'm going to switch over. Stan, if you want to switch over to the other picture or to my phone. Are there any questions that you guys have? Kind of give you an idea. First, let me reiterate, I hope you feel like you could look at this and it's not something, vastly different than what we would normally talk about you eating just to be healthy as far as preventing cancer, healthy as far as maintaining a good weight and not having, tons of extra calories. This is all nicely portioned out. So it's good if you're trying just to eat a good balanced meal without everything being kind of dry and boring. You can still have some cheese. You can still have things that are savory. You can still have dessert. It's just a matter of twisting a little so that you're getting a better benefit out of it than what we would do if we got, our big fried chicken parmesan and a big scoop of ice cream at the end and maybe even starting with bread and olive oil. So it's just about doing little substitutions so that you can still have all the flavor you want without all of the fat. Anyone with any questions for me? Heart healthy or otherwise?
Yes, Becky, I have a question about the mousse. I thought you said something about you could use vanilla.
Vanilla extract. So if you want, you could use the extract. If you don't mind having a little bit more sugar, and that's another thing you could do. Sorry, Spotlight here. I just use a little vanilla extract. A little bit of warmer flavor you get from vanilla. You could also just use like vanilla yogurt. You just have to be careful because a lot of times when it's already flavored, they add a lot of sugar. So that's why I will try to use, my own flavors to it so that I'm not getting all the extra sugar that I don't necessarily want. If you're going to use vanilla Greek yogurt that already has some sweetness, look for ones where the grams of sugar is less than 10 grams. That's usually the goal because a lot of times you can find certain, vanilla yogurts that can have like 2 or 3 teaspoons of added sugar, which no yogurt is that good. I like yogurt, but it doesn't need that much sugar. It kind of loses that healthy edge. So, but if you do find a lower sugar one, Siggi's is good for low sugar vanilla. There's a Greek yogurt that Trader Joe's carries, or a Skyr yogurt. They do a vanilla yogurt that's very good. That's not high in sugar. You could easily use just one container of that with the raspberries and the gelatin, and you don't need to add any honey to it because it will already be sweet enough from the yogurt. But I would kind of play with it and just see how much tartness you like, or if you want to, you could even throw a little scoop of sugar along with it. It's really about retraining our palate so that we're not so focused on sweet and really pulling up other flavors to give the same sort of satisfaction.
Move towards the laptop a little bit.
Me? Sorry. Oh, as far as sound, I apologize.
That's okay.
Thank you very much. That was very helpful. How many servings did you get out of what you made?
So the one that I made, I used a small half tray. What you can get out of the recipe I gave you is actually 8 servings.
Oh,
so
wow.
Depending on the size of the rings, because there's such a difference, like when I filled this ramekin here, because it's a wider one, I actually had a smaller ring and then I cut another small one in half to sort of fill up the space since it wasn't going to be sliding apart. But you can get a good amount of servings from it. because eggplants, especially if you're using 3 medium ones. And what I actually cut up and baked was 2. So if I did that third one in there, easily could fill a regular like 9x13 tray, should be fine. But don't worry if it's a little bit off. You're just kind of playing with it. If you need to squeeze stuff in the middle, if you want to try cutting them lengthwise and doing it that way so you don't have quite so many rings, it will taste exactly the same. You just follow the same procedure with the baking and the flipping in the middle so that you get that nice crispness.
Wonderful, thank you.
You're welcome.
Becky, I would notice you used like was it a vegetable spray that you used, a nonstick?
It's a nonstick. It's actually just it's olive oil with no propellant in it. So I bought the one it's just pressurized. It's not a nonstick cooking spray. It's actually olive oil.
Olive oil. Because I've been scolded by my children for using the vegetable spray.
Yeah.
That something about the contents of it, and it's not healthy. So
A lot of times when you use, like, a lot of the different sprays will use vegetable oil, and what the difference is, like, same thing when we say use canola oil and olive oil versus using like vegetable oil, is that it's all about those good fatty acids. Olive oil, canola oil are higher in omega-3s, which are anti-inflammatory. Other vegetables, everything has a balance, omega-3s, omega-6s. Omega-6s are what you find in vegetable oil because it is more processed. It's not like one vegetable that's pressed and here's the oil. It's multiple byproducts of things put together. So after a while, you don't get the same amount of antioxidants because it's been processed down and you've lost the omega-3s, which is why they'll chastise you and say, don't use that as much. You know, we really want to make sure that we're getting the heart healthy benefit. You know, those things work well because the smoke points are pretty high. But when you have the option and you can find, now it's so convenient, you can find the canola oil or the olive oil with no propellants in it. And they'll even say, you know, look on here, propellant free, gluten free, you know, it's vegan. There's nothing else in here other than olive oil. This is a quick option so I can get a nice light mist without, you know, having to saturate it, because now I'm trying to dump it and spread it and it's a little bit harder to work with. This is nice. Or, you know, go on Williams Sonoma. They do have these ones that you plunge it up and down, put your regular old olive oil in it, and you know exactly what's in there and you spray it. So it probably would just say spray can for oil, and it's an easy option. I've had one in the past. I've lost it. Now I need to order another one, but it does make it easier in order to do a very, very light spray of oil versus having, you know, ending up with maybe 2-3 tablespoons. It's such a sensitive thing because 1 tablespoon of oil is 120 calories. So we don't want to go overboard on it. Though it is good and healthy, it's got omega-3s. It does have concentrated calories. So it doesn't take very much for it to go too much the other direction. And now I have a high calorie meal and sort of, you know, defeat the purpose of trying to be a little bit more heart healthy and conscious of, you know, good, healthy portions.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? All right.
Along that line, is
Yeah.
it best then when you see recipes, other than your recipes, but if you see recipes that says about having vegetable oil, just to replace that with canola oil?
Yes,
That's
you
just,
can switch it. You could switch it out.
okay.
You know,
Thank
most of the time it makes the biggest difference. Like if you're going to be doing more frying, it would say vegetable oil, because you cannot heat olive oil or canola oil to like a deep fryer temperature. The smoke point's wrong and the oil would degrade and it's just not going to be as healthy that way. But usually with heart healthy cooking, we're not talking about deep fryers. So yes, you can just substitute it out. You're not going to notice any difference in your recipes.
Wonderful, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Becky. Most
You're
appreciated.
welcome. Thank you guys so much for joining us tonight. Next month, we have the 4-leaf pasta that we're going to be doing right before March, before St. Patrick's Day. Sam, what's the date of that one? Do you have it on your calendar out there? Unmute yourself, because then we'll have that. Most of you all.
That's on March 11th, and that's from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m.
Okay, and that's going to be on a Thursday. So
Yes.
just so you guys, we're bopping around with the cooking class because starting in March, I'm doing another class every Monday night. So we're finding different times, different days of the week So make sure you pay attention to it. Hopefully that works out because it actually doesn't conflict on Thursday evening with any other class. So 5 to 6. So we try to get people in who maybe aren't home from work or not available before 5 o'clock. I hope you can be there, but as always, we are always live streaming onto our YouTube channel. So anytime you can't be here to watch it live, you can always watch the recording afterward and you won't miss out on one bit. And I'm always happy, reach out if you have not been signed up for a class, reach out to me, ask me for the recipes. I will email them to you. That's not a problem. All right, ladies. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next month.
Thank you
It
very
was
much.
great having you.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming, Mom.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Right.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.